Rihi Jain, who is speaking on an interfaith tapestry, Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism. Okay,
Awesome.
you're on.
Thank you so much. Let me just share my screen.
Mhm.
Are you all able to see and hear my screen and everything okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. All right, awesome. Well, good morning slash afternoon, everybody. My name is Rihi, and I'm YJ's current Director of Education and daytime co-lead for the 2026 YJ convention. Outside of YJ, I'm currently a medical student who's extremely passionate about bringing people and communities together. And today I want to take you all on a journey, not across geography, but across ideas and across the ethical threads that different faith traditions have been weaving for thousands of years, often without knowing that, hey, we're all working on the same fabric. This talk is called an Interfaith Tapestry, and by the end of it, I hope you'll see that Jainism, Hinduism, and Buddhism are not just separate traditions, but as conversations and ethical imperatives that are waiting to happen. I've also had the opportunity to interview Dr. Justin Henry, who is an assistant professor of religious studies at the University of South Florida, who specializes in Buddhist and Jain philosophy. And a lot of his points I'll mention on the topics that I'm going to talk about in this presentation. Again, thank you, Arhat Institute, and thank you, YJ, for this opportunity, and thank you to my team, and of course, Dr. Henry, for helping to curate the ideas and helping to bring the ideas in this talk to fruition. But with that, I'm going to keep going. So I'm going to start my presentation with a paradox. We are more connected than ever at any point in human history. We carry the entire internet in our pockets, can video call someone on the other side of the world in seconds, but yet we have never been more divided. I mean, scroll through social media for 5 minutes, you'll find religious misunderstandings everywhere. Minority faiths get reduced to stereotypes. Jainism gets called a type of Hinduism. Islam gets reduced to headlines. Christianity gets flattened into a single political position. We talk about each other constantly, but we rarely talk to each other or take the time to actually understand. And that's the problem that Dr. Henry puts so plainly. It's very easy to demonize people on the basis of difference through ignorance when you actually don't really know what those differences really are. And I hope you all keep this in mind along with the question I'm about to ask, because this is what really fueled this entire talk, and it's the engine behind many of the points I'm going to make. So again, here's a question I would like you all to sit with. Do different religions at their core, do they share the same ethical values, even when their surface level beliefs look completely different? I think the answer is yes, and I think that Jainism gives us one of the clearest frameworks for seeing why, which I hope becomes more apparent as I go through my talk. But before we get into Jainism specifically, I want to address a misconception about interfaith dialogue itself, because in conversations that I've had with other people about this, I've frequently heard this pushback before. People sometimes worry that engaging with other faiths means watering down your own, that if you sit with people who think differently from you or who believe differently, you'll somehow lose what makes that tradition yours. But that's not what interfaith dialogue, at least in my mind, what that really is. It's not about agreement. It's not about everyone deciding that all religions are actually the same or that individual doctrines don't matter. It's not syncretism, and it's not about giving anything up. However, what it is about is literacy. It's about actually understanding what different traditions teach on their own terms and not through rumors and not through caricatures. And it's about ethical coexistence and about learning to live well alongside people whose cosmology, whose belief systems are different from yours. And that is the core reason that I attend my school's Bible study, despite being a Jain, which covers a different theme idea and teaching every time. And every time I go, I'm so fascinated by the theological differences and ideological overlaps, which have actually brought me closer to Jainism, and have encouraged deeper introspection, which is a value that we hold near and dear as Jains. And it has also encouraged me to engage further in these conversations and to truly learn, discover, and explore using my Jain values as a grounding tool. Building off of this, so when we don't engage, so the building off of this, like here's the thing, when we don't engage in these interfaith conversations, we don't stay, it's not neutral. We create a vacuum, and that vacuum gets filled with assumptions. And Dr. Henry calls these assumptions fantasies about what those differences, about what those religious differences actually are. And those fantasies can lead to fear, and then fear can lead to dismissal, and then dismissal translates into action that can lead to real harm. So therefore, interfaith dialogue is an optional, and as I'll argue by the end of this talk, it becomes an ethical imperative for us as interfaith citizens. So what does Jainism actually bring to the conversation? So as I'm sure you all are familiar with the 3 A's of Jainism, but I'm going to take a little bit of a spin to them. But I truly believe that these 3 principles are among the most powerful ethical tools that we can bring as Jains to the interfaith conversation. So I'm going to begin by talking a little bit about Ahimsa. So it's not about just not hitting somebody or like physical violence. It also means living in the way you live with radical care in your thoughts, your actions, your words, your man, vachan, kai. It means minimizing harm at every level of your existence. Although yes, it's the root of the Jain vegetarian ethic, yes, but it also extends into how we argue, how we listen, how we show up when we disagree with other people. Second is Anekantavada, multiplicity of viewpoints. It's the idea that our reality is very complex and that no single perspective captures the entirety of the truth. And it's exactly the kind of antidote to the kind of rigid my way or the highway thinking that is tearing communities apart right now, especially in the religious sector. And it says, hey, like, your truth is real, my truth is real, so is someone else's. Last is Aparigraha, non-possessiveness. In the traditional sense, we think of this as like material possessions, but it also applies to ideas. Specifically, when we talk about the interfaith community, it means letting go of ego. It means letting go of the need to be right, letting go of the need for your convictions, or being willing to hold your convictions without using them as a weapon when it comes to having these difficult conversations. When we talk about the 3 A's, even though we have specific names for them in Jainism, I want to bring something to your attention. None of these values are exclusive to Jainism. They resonate across traditions and across religions, which I'm going to talk a little bit about and on the next slide. So one of the most striking things that Dr. Henry pointed out is that again, like I mentioned before, the ethical precepts at the heart of Jainism, the 3 A's that I just talked about, they show up in different forms across virtually every major world religion. When we look at Christianity, we have compassion, and Ephesians tells us to be kind and forgiving, just as God forgave us. When you look at Islam, you have mercy in Islam, and the Quran opens with it in every single prayer to address God as the most gracious and the most merciful. In Buddhism, you have humility. The Dhammapad says to look first at what you yourself have done. Seva in Sikhism, when you have service, it's not just a practice. It is a path to peace, and it is such a core part of their communities. One thing I want to talk about here is that these aren't the same thing. I'm not saying that these are the same thing. I'm saying that the theologies are different, the practices are different, cosmologies are different, but there is a shared moral aspiration that is a common thread in that tapestry that runs through all of these. And it's a commitment to something beyond the individual self. Looking at this a little bit further, this is what makes Jainism's contribution unique. Jainism, with the 3 A's and amongst other concepts, we don't claim ownership. We don't claim exclusive ownership of these values. We are not saying that we got here first, or ours is the purest version of these values. Instead, the 3 A's, they offer a framework that can hold all of these values together in a dialogue to have a productive conversation that our modern world requires. For example, Ahimsa gives us a way to talk across differences without causing harm. Anekantavada gives us philosophical permission to honor multiple truths at once, and Aparigraha reminds us to check our egos at the door before we even begin those conversations. And that is what makes Jainism such a powerful interfaith catalyst. And not because we have all the answers, but because it helps us develop the right disposition for asking those questions altogether. Moving on from here, here's where things get a little bit interesting and a little bit uncomfortable. So given everything I just said, given that 3 A's enable us to have a strong ethical framework or toolkit for interfaith work, you would expect Jains to be everywhere in interfaith conversations, at the table at every major dialogue, and represented in many global religious conversations. But that is not the case. Despite this, Jainism remains significantly underrepresented in interfaith ecosystems, and it's worth asking why. Tempting to say that, hey, there's only 4.9 million Jains worldwide, but population size doesn't really fully explain it. The Baha'i faith, which is a similar size, has carved out a visible role in global interfaith work and has done work with bigger organizations like the UN. So if it's not that, is it limited institutional outreach? Is it a tradition of turning inward, introspecting, rather than going outwards? Is it a cultural hesitation to represent the faith in public forums? Probably all of them, all of the above to some degree, and it's a conversation that our community needs to have. Despite this, though, there are examples of Jains who are doing this work and are having these important conversations. Dr. Henry had told me about Dr. Bana Shah, who is a member of the Jain Society of Tampa Bay, who has participated in global interfaith events and has even met Pope Francis. So Jain voices, when they do show up, they do have an impact. In fact, Dr. Henry had also said that most people's reaction to the Jain religion upon first hearing about it is something very positive. And because we have that positive association, it leads into something he called ambassador potential. And it's something that we should really take advantage of as a community and really step into. So let's get a little bit more specific here and talk about how Jainism actually relates to its two closest members, Hinduism and Buddhism. One of the most common misunderstandings, especially amongst non-Jains, is that Jainism is simply a branch of Hinduism. And I understand why that mistake may happen, right? We share sacred languages, we share cultural practices, we even celebrate some of the same festivals. We exist in the same geographic region and the same social landscape. However, Jainism is its own independent tradition. It has its own ancient texts, the Agams. We have our own lineage of Tirthankars and a slightly different metaphysical system. And Dr. Henry makes this point very clearly. Despite these differences, even though Jainism has been a very small minority religion in India, its impact on Hinduism and Buddhism is outsized. When we look at Buddhism specifically, even that in of itself is philosophically fascinating because these two traditions share so much ethically, but disagree fundamentally on metaphysics. Although we both emphasize Ahimsa, we both honor renunciation and self-discipline. We have the Mahavrats while the Buddhists have the Panchshila, the 5 precepts. They mirror each other very much. However, Jainism affirms the existence of an eternal Jiv. We accrue karma, we seek liberation, seek moksha. Hinduism describes the idea of that soul being part of a bigger whole in a created universe, while Jainism emphasizes the individual soul. And Buddhism teaches anatma, where there is no soul, and everything is impermanent and interdependent with each other. Even though I'm talking about these similarities and differences, right here is what actually matters. Different truths can still lead to shared ethical outcomes, and all of these religions and more coexist. They can coexist without being the same. And that is, I'd argue, one of the greatest gifts to the interfaith world. But what does this mean for all of us practically in our daily lives? How can we apply it? I want to suggest that the 3 A's aren't just ancient Jain philosophy, they're a blueprint for interfaith citizenship that any of us can use regardless of our background and across sectors. Using the 3 A's as a framework, right? Ahimsa and interfaith engagement means leading with empathy over malice. Before you respond to someone whose beliefs differ from yours, ask yourself, how does my engagement affect them? See the human before the belief. Anekantavada means choosing curiosity over certainty, seek to understand before seeking to be understood yourself. Sit with the discomfort of not having the complete picture. Multiple truths can coexist, and that is not a weakness, it is a strength. Finally, Aparigraha means choosing dialogue over dismissal, letting go of the need to win, letting go of the need to be right all the time. Being comfortable with living in the gray. Real exchange, the kind that actually changes minds and builds bridges, requires releasing ego from the outcome and instead putting yourself in the process. Dr. Henry brings all of this together quite nicely. He says when we don't engage, we leave room for harmful assumptions and fantasies about what those differences actually are, and that is not a neutral outcome. Disengagement also has consequences. Therefore, it becomes an ethical imperative. True interfaith citizenship, again, demands effort, demands humility, and like I said before, not optional. Again, really, really harping on the fact that it becomes an ethical imperative for all of us. And so I want to close with the image I started with, a tapestry. A tapestry is made of distinct threads. You pull any one thread out and you don't just lose that color. You don't lose that thread. You weaken the entire thing. Every thread is necessary. Every thread is different. And together they make something none of them could have made alone. And that is what our faith traditions are. They're distinct, they're irreducible, and they're woven together into something larger than any single one of us or ourselves, which is emphasized across every major world religion, as I talked about previously. So therefore, how we represent our individual traditions matters. How we engage with differences shapes our shared future, and learning across faiths, really learning with humility and care, is in and of itself an act of nonviolence, an act of ahimsa in practice. With that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention. Michami dukram for any harm or offense I may have caused, knowingly or unknowingly, and I'm happy to respond to your questions in the chat. Thank you.